Welcome back to Miller's Movers, where each week I take a look back at the action from the weekend that's just been, as well as looking at the new revised handicap marks released on a Tuesday morning. And also, as we build up into the Cheltenham Festival, each week I've had a special guest. And this week we have festival winning jockey Bradley Gibbs, who won the Foxhunters Chase last year on Premier Magic, joining us. We'll start with the weekend that was. Sometimes a quiet weekend at Kempton, graded races, but perhaps not full of depth because connections are keeping horses back for Cheltenham and Aintree festivals. But I thought there were some good performances. Kalif Du Berlais won the Adonis hurdle. Plenty of people seemed a little bit disappointed with his performance. He did only win by just under a length, but he was giving £5 to Gimme 5 for Harry Derham, who I think would have been tuned to the max for that performance. I think that was certainly Gimme 5's Gold Cup. It certainly wasn't Kalif Du Berlais's Gold Cup. They're already talking of Gold Cups proper for the future for this big horse from France, not a typical juvenile. The pair of them pulled 10 lengths clear of the third horse. He's clearly a chaser in the making. I liked how Kalif Du Berlais got down and knuckled home at the finish against a speedy arrival. Certainly wouldn't be disappointed with him. Don't be surprised if he misses now the rest of the season. They've already said they're not going to go to Cheltenham with him for the Triumph Hurdle. They will look at Aintree, but my money would be on the fact that he'll go off to grass now, have a nice summer at grass, come back in, and they're talking about going novice chasing with him as a 4-year-old, where of course he gets that valuable 4-year-old allowance. The other impressive performance came in the Dovecot with the novice lump sum, confirming form with Fiercely Proud, actually increasing the distance. He beat him when the pair finished second and third in the Rossington Main at Doncaster. Lump sum travelled really powerfully, jumped immaculately and saw his race out very powerfully towards the end. He's clearly a horse that likes cutting the ground and is progressing nicely. And the pair of them perhaps suggested that the form of Jericho de Repenay should be upgraded. Plenty of people were disappointed by what he did in the Rossington Main at Doncaster, but maybe it wasn't such a poor performance after all, as these two, Lump Sum and Fiercely Proud, do look like smart performers in their own making. Lump Sum doesn't hold any entries in the novice hurdles at Cheltenham Festival. He does hold handicap entries, but Sam Thomas, generally as a trainer, brings these nice horses through slowly. I wouldn't be at all surprised if he were to miss Cheltenham and maybe look at one of the graded novice hurdles at Aintree, and I'm sure he's a chaser in the making as well. One of the things I did want to touch on before we got into the handicap moves and shakers is the slightly disappointing form of Nicky Henderson through the weekend. I sided with two of his runners at the weekend, Arclight and Tweed Skirt, and they both performed fairly poorly. Soft ground maybe worked against the pair of them, but they did stop quite suddenly. And Nicky Henderson's form over the last 14 days through February, 13 runners, 7 which have pulled up, just producing 1 winner. It is a quiet time of the year for him, I know. Soft ground generally is not sort of conditions that see Nicky Henderson horses at their best. But on top of that, we've heard this morning that Constitution Hill worked poorly at Kempton on a racecourse gallop. I've seen the footage and he did work poorly indeed. He was a long way behind his 2 work companions. And more concerningly, you could hear his breathing over the camera phone, very thick in his wind. Nicky Henderson has since said that a scope after that gallop produced significant mucus and they're not giving up hope just yet. They might well look now perhaps to give him a 5-day course of antibiotics. Horses, in my experience, can be a little bit quiet in themselves after receiving antibiotics, so that's going to take them well into next week. So they're going to have 7 days to turn him around and get him on peak form. I guess this boils down to whether this was a racecourse gallop designed to add a degree of fitness or whether it was a racecourse gallop designed just to freshen his mind and have a nice away day. If it's the former, they're going to be struggling to get him to peak fitness now with just a week of a clear run before the Cheltenham Festival. But Nicky Henderson is a master of his trade. I think as well it's important that a few people who were very disparaging of the fact that they avoided Trials Day at Cheltenham need to perhaps take a look at themselves. This is a man that knows his horses. He clearly has struggled with Constitution Hill this year and his health. That's why they didn't run in the international hurdle, and it's proven that he was quite right. So hopefully a bit of sunshine in the sky will get Constitution Hill back to his best, because we all want him there for a champion hurdle, which will be severely lacking in depth if he doesn't appear. On to the handicap movers and shakers, and just one horse who's gone up in the weights this week that is of interest, and that's Mr. Vango, trained by Mark Bradstock, who produced a demolition job in the Devon National, and I mean a demolition job in every sense of the word. He demolished his field. He also demolished the second last, did very well to stand up, put a great big hole in that. But he never really came off the bridle in a 3 mile 6 slog on soft ground. Jumped very well under Ben Jones on just his second chase start. Won by a fence, and there's no exaggeration in that. He was crossing the line when they were jumping the last. It was a really impressive performance. And the handicappers put him up £12 to a mark of 132. He feasibly could have gone more than that. I think actually this wasn't as severe as I was perhaps expecting. I was almost expecting 14, maybe even £16. It is hard to get a grasp on quite what he's achieved. He was racing against a fairly small field of fairly exposed, slightly moody, older rivals, but it was impressive nevertheless. I think soft ground is important to him. He has disappointed twice previously over hurdles on good to soft ground, but even his point-to-point form from Horseheath reads really well. He slammed Santos Blue by 125 lengths. Santos Blue is a 132 rated hurdler. I think this is a smart horse in the making. Maybe if the ground came up soft, the Bradstock team would look to the Scottish National, but if not, I'm sure they've already got Chepstow in December, just after Christmas, circled on the calendar for the Welsh National of 2024. He looks a smart horse and certainly one you want to keep on side. Horses going down now in the handicap, and the first one I want to start on is Lallygag for Paul Nicholls. He's tried chasing this season as a novice chaser, and it hasn't gone all that well. He hasn't looked the most confident over his fences. He switched back to hurdles at Taunton at the beginning of last week and ran quite well, but soft ground seemed to work against him. He sort of didn't finish his race off very well. He was dropped £4, which is quite a sizable drop. Horses tend to go up in large chunks, 4, 6, 8, 12, as we just saw with Mr. Vango. They don't tend to come down in big chunks. They tend to come down in dribbles of 1s and 2s. So £4 from a mark of 132 down to 128 was quite significant, I thought. This is a horse that's got some very good back form in novice hurdles, noticeably when just a length and a quarter behind Grey Dawning at Exeter. He then went to Cheltenham and ran very well off a mark of 132 over 2 mile 4 on good ground in April. Good ground, as I said, is essential to this horse. Down to a mark of 128 now. I'm sure Paul Nicholls will find one, if not more, opportunities for this young horse going into the spring, particularly in the gap between Cheltenham and Aintree, where racing can tend to be a little bit weaker. Spring ground does tend to arrive at some point in that period. So Lallygag off a mark of 128 is certainly one I think you should have in your trackers. And then going back to the Dovecot, Idie Wood finished third behind Lump Sum and Fiercely Proud. He didn't seem to cope all that well with a drop back to 2 miles in this Grade 2, having won over 2 mile 4 at Plumpton on his previous start. He was the first off the bridle well before they turned in, but I loved how he knuckled down and battled all the way to the line to eventually finish third. He was beaten 5 lengths by Fiercely Proud, but he would have been much closer for that, but for having to sort of power down to the last hurdle. Gavin Sheehan didn't appear to be able to find a stride. Sat up and waited for him to pop, and then almost ended up waiting too much. It was a very slow jump. They lost plenty of momentum. They lost plenty of ground. I loved how this horse ran straight as a die from turning in. Didn't drift, didn't shift, just ran with his head down in a really likeable fashion. Attitude will win you plenty of races. He's dropped down £1 to a mark of 125. I'm sure Idie Wood, back on a little bit softer ground and back up in trip, can find some decent contests back end of this season and the beginning of next. 2 new entries for you now, and both coming from the same race at Doncaster last week. Leader in the Park won the race for Ben Pauling and Ben Jones, who are having a great time of it at the moment, and Ben Pauling certainly seems to have a strong team of novice hurdlers. He made his own running. He jumped very soundly at Doncaster and produced a very good performance. His first start of the season over hurdles at Ascot was a decent run. He finished just 2 lengths behind Farnoak, who's rated 129. He then went back to Ascot about 3 weeks later and was disappointing. Could only finish 5th. I think you have to put a line through that performance. He's clearly better than that. He's a big, raw horse. He did weaken and eyed a little bit in the closing stages, which allowed the runner-up to close. But I think he's definitely an embryonic chaser. But a mark of 119, to me, seemed lenient as an opening mark. I'm sure he's not going to be overfaced, but I would be disappointed and surprised if Ben Pauling couldn't find another winning opportunity for this horse off an opening mark of 119. The horse that finished second behind Leader in the Park at Doncaster is Grand Albert for Donald McCain. I was really impressed by what he found at the back end of the race, given that he'd been very keen through the early part. He sort of looked far less polished than the winner. He hung a little bit up the home straight, both left and right. Brian Hughes was certainly having to organise him a little bit. But given how keenly he had run in the first part of the race, it was an impressive effort to finish his race off so strongly on testing ground at Doncaster. He's a work in progress, but he's got an opening mark of 114. That looks to me workable, and he's a horse I will follow, and I'll be quite satisfied if perhaps he doesn't win next time. There'll be a win just around the corner for Gran Albert and Donald McCain. And then to finish with one non-mover for you, and again it's a Ben Pauling horse, and it's Bow to Greatness, who stays on a mark of 133 after finishing third on Saturday at Kempton in the Coral Trophy. He perhaps would have got closer but for jumping away to his left up the home straight, but it was still a strong run on ground that was probably a little bit softer than ideal. His very best form comes on good ground, and he's a horse that tends to improve into the spring. Like I said, he did forfeit a bit of ground. He rallied late on. It was a strong performance. He stays on a mark of 133. In Aintree last spring, he ran a very good race to finish second off a mark of 132 in the valuable 3-mile handicap chase at the Grand National Festival. He'd be really interesting to me if Ben Pauling keeps him back for that and keeps him fresh. But I am mindful of the fact that he does hold 3 entries at the Cheltenham Festival in the Kinmure, the Ultima and the National Hunt Chase. For me, I'm not sure Cheltenham is his track. I would be looking to avoid him at Cheltenham. But if they do keep him fresh and they go to Aintree off a mark of 133, just a pound higher than when he finished second there last year, he would be very much of interest there. So delighted to be joined this week by Bradley Gibbs, who rode Premier Magic to victory in last season's Foxhunters at the Cheltenham Festival. One of the things, Brad, that confuses me is we've got previous winners from the festival, Lossiemouth, Galopin de Champs, Al Fabiolo returning, all as short price favourite for their chosen races this year, and yet Premier Magic isn't favourite. It seems strange to me. I see he's won both of his point-to-points this year at Sheriff's Hutton and Brocklesby Park. Does he give you every feel that he's as good this year as he was last year? And how's he going? And how do you view this year's race?
Oh, definitely. I think he's in as good as form this year as what he was last year. He ran very well the first day at Sheriff Hutton. The ground was very deep. He won by 10 lengths. I took the cheap pieces off him to go back pointing this year. They'll go back on for the Foxhunters. I took him off for his points, and he hit the front a little bit soon. The first day just ran around a little bit, but that's always been him, and he hits the front. That's why we put the cheap pieces on him last year, but he was very good the first day. Then the second day, everybody dodged him, and there was only 3 that turned up. So unfortunately, we didn't have much of a run the last day, but he's still done it very well, But yeah, no, I think he's just going into the race this year as well as he was last year.
And last year, I mean, you took it up virtually at the top of the hill, and you were quite positive. So clearly, you see his stamina as his forte. Certainly, I think the favourite Ferns Lock, I personally would have questions about his stamina. Do you envisage riding the race in a similar manner this year, sort of being fairly positive from the top of the hill home?
Yeah, definitely. And no, it's just see how it pans out, but we'll just ride him wide again. Obviously, I tried riding him the year before down the inside, and everything just got a bit tight, and he just backed out of it. So I rode him wide last year. I'll just do the same again. And last year he took me there at the top of the hill, and I was at that point of the race where I couldn't really take him back. I could only go forward with him, and thank God another one come with me to the last. Look, we did probably got racing a little bit early, but that's all he does is stay. He's won over 4 mile in upon a point for us. The further he goes, the better he is,
Yeah. And you perhaps be quite unusual. Certainly, a lot of the Irish will prep through Hunter Chases, as will some of the sort of UK horses that are perhaps with licensed trainers. Why have you chosen to stay with a point-to-point prep versus going to the likes of Taunton or whatever for a Hunter Chase?
No, well, I just wanted him to have 2 easier days out then. Just to get his confidence through the roof, Didn't want to be going into a Hunter Chase then in real deep ground and in a good race then, and having to get into a battle and maybe taking him a little bit longer to come out of the race, then I just thought if you just go for £2 points, and that's exactly what I done last year. And I just thought just try and keep it the same and just try and fill him full of confidence so he's going there in the best possible form we could be,
And so as we're talking now, we're 2 weeks away from the start of the festival. Obviously, you'd run on the Friday. What's the sort of routine? What's the plan for him now for the next sort of 14, 17 days leading him up into his renewal and hopefully regaining of his title?
Yeah, he'll tip away this week now. He'll probably have an away day next week. We'd take a few to Newmarket. There's a 2 mile grass gallop there, so we'll take him away and work him one day next week. And then not a lot. Then he'll have a school once he goes there as well. But he's not the type of horse that takes a hell of a lot of work, So we just got to keep him fresh, really.
So keep him fresh, and then on to Cheltenham, regain the title. If you look at the field and there's one horse you're particularly sort of fearful of, who is that?
Obviously, you can't take it's on the line. Like he ran a Stormer last year, only a length and a half behind us, and he's, I think he's probably an up and coming horse. And Fern's Lock, he looked quite smart in his Hunter Chase a couple of weeks back there. So, the few of the Irish horses look to be, but look, they were all there last year, so hopefully he can do the same as what he does last year.
So you wouldn't swap him?
No, definitely not, no.
And I don't think it'd be worth having you on and not mentioning another high-class Hunter Chase you've got in your yard. Fir Jaguin, he won at Garthorpe earlier this year in a point-to-point, beat Kalif Du Berlais, who is a decent Hunter Chaser. Things perhaps didn't pan out for him in the Aintree Foxhunters last year, where he got rid of you fairly early on. Does jump a little bit right, but he was wickedly impressive to my mind when winning over 2 miles at the Cheltenham at the Foxhunters meeting in the evening, which if people aren't aware of it, it's definitely a meeting that's worth going to. I think it's one of the best days racing I get each year. What's the plan for him? And have you sort of found a reason for the jumping out to the right? Have you been able to iron it out, or do you think it's just a kink he's got that you're going to have to live with?
Well, to be honest, we've done a lot of work with him. Harry, our back man, he does him quite regularly now. We had all his back injected at the start of the year. We've had his fetlocks, his hocks. We've had him injected every year, everywhere, and he ran in Garthorpe, and he was very impressive at Garthorpe. He didn't really come out of a canter, but he jumped a lot straighter at Garthorpe. I didn't think he went half. Well, he didn't go right at all, really. It was just one or two fences. So he'll have another couple of runs pointing. I'm not 100% sure what to do, whether to go back to Aintree. The trouble with him, he's very small, but he's very brave, and he doesn't like. To go around Aintree, you almost need to just brush through the top of him, where he was going down and jumping him and clearing him, giving him a foot, where he was jumping him too big then. And I think that took its toll when we went to Cheltenham then. He jumped violently right, and jumped quite high, and like he won the 2 miler there, but he probably went about 3 miler how far right he was going. So we're undecided where to go with him. He'll definitely end up back at Cheltenham in the Hunter Chase meeting in May. He'll definitely end up back there, but I'm not sure whether to go back to Aintree or not yet.
So that's the plan for him. And then to wind up with, obviously you're as much of a racing nut as the best of us. Looking at Cheltenham as a whole, is there a horse that you're particularly excited to see, and do you have a selection as a punter yourself for the Cheltenham Festival?
Premier Magic. It's the only one I'm looking forward to seeing.
That'll do for us, Brad. Premier Magic, you heard it here first. Tipped up on the SBK podcast last year at 66-1. Won't be quite such a big price this year, but I certainly struggle to see why he's not a short price favourite. Brad, thanks very much for your time. Good to speak to a fellow Welshman, and all the best in 2 weeks' time.
No problem. Thank you very much.